He hadn't trusted anyone enough to let them into his guarded world for 2 years, not since losing everything that mattered to him. But when a desperate widow appeared at his workshop door in the pouring rain, clutching the hands of 2 frightened twin boys and carrying a secret that could change their lives forever, what happened next would transform not only a broken man's heart, but reveal a truth so extraordinary it would shake the foundations of a small American town. She claimed to be just another struggling mother seeking refuge, but hidden beneath her humble appearance was a royal European bloodline that powerful people would kill to keep buried. What unfolded was a story of forbidden love, dangerous secrets, and the night a former princess chose the family she found over the crown she was born to wear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of the chisel against wood had become Dax Ironwood's only companion in the 2 years since his world collapsed. Each morning at dawn, he would unlock the heavy oak doors of his furniture workshop in Willowbrook and lose himself in the rhythm of creation, sanding, carving, shaping raw timber into something beautiful and useful. It was methodical work that required focus, precision, and most importantly, silence. The kind of silence that couldn't be filled with memories or regrets, or the echo of laughter that would never return. Dax was 34 years old, though the lines around his steel gray eyes and the premature silver threading through his dark hair made him look older. His hands, calloused and permanently stained with wood polish, moved with practiced efficiency as he worked on a dining table that would seat a family of 6 families. The word still caught in his throat like sawdust. The workshop occupied the bottom floor of a converted barn on the outskirts of Willowbrook, a town small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, but respectful enough to leave Dax alone with his grief. Above the workshop was a small apartment where he lived in Spartan simplicity: a bed, a kitchen table for one, and shelves lined with woodworking manuals and nothing else. No photographs, no mementos, no reminders of before. Before was when this place had been filled with different sounds. The excited chatter of his 8-year-old daughter Emma as she helped him with projects, her small hands holding screws while he explained the difference between oak and maple. The warm laughter of his wife Sarah as she brought them sandwiches and stayed to watch him work, her artist's eye appreciating the beauty he coaxed from ordinary lumber. The plans they'd made to expand the business, maybe even teach Emma the trade someday if she wanted to learn. All of that ended on a rainy Tuesday evening in October, 2 years and 3 months ago. Dax rarely let himself remember the details anymore, but sometimes they crept in anyway. The phone call from the hospital, the drunk driver who ran the red light, the word instantly that the doctor kept repeating, as if saying it enough times would make it easier to understand. Sarah and Emma had been coming home from Emma's art class, the one where she was learning to paint landscapes just like her mother. They never made it home. The funeral had been standing room only. Sarah had taught 3rd grade at Willowbrook Elementary for 8 years, and Emma had been everyone's favorite little helper at the Saturday farmers market, where Dax sold his handcrafted cutting boards and toy chests. The whole town mourned with him, brought casseroles he couldn't eat, offered shoulders he couldn't lean on. They meant well, but their sympathy felt like sandpaper against his raw wounds. After the funeral, Dax had methodically removed every trace of his former life from the workshop and apartment. He donated Sarah's paintings to the school. He gave Emma's toys to other families. He packed their clothes and photos into boxes that he stored in a unit across town, somewhere he would never have to see them again. Then he painted over the cheerful yellow walls with stark white, rearranged the furniture so nothing looked the same, and began the process of forgetting how to feel anything at all. That the people of Willowbrook had tried to draw him back into the community. Mrs. Patterson from the bakery still left fresh bread on his doorstep every Sunday, even though he'd asked her to stop. Pastor Reynolds had invited him to dinner countless times, each invitation politely declined. The other fathers at the hardware store would nod and make small talk about the weather or baseball, carefully avoiding any mention of families or future plans, but Dax preferred the isolation. Isolation meant safety. It meant no one else could be taken away from him because he wouldn't let anyone get close enough to matter. His customers communicated mostly through written orders left in a box by the front door, along with their contact information and payment. He would complete their furniture pieces and call them for pickup. Business transactions were clean, simple, and blessedly impersonal. His days followed an unvarying routine that served as both structure and armor. Up at 5:30. Coffee and toast. Work until noon. Brief lunch. Work until 6. Microwave dinner. While watching the news. Read woodworking magazines until exhaustion finally granted him sleep. Weekends were longer versions of the same routine, with the workshop closed but personal projects keeping his hands busy and his mind occupied. The only variation came on the third Tuesday of every month, when Dax would drive to the cemetery with fresh flowers. He never stayed long, just long enough to pull any weeds from around the headstone, arrange the flowers, and whisper a brief update about the workshop. The conversations were one-sided and stilted, more like business reports than expressions of love. He had learned not to say the things that hurt too much to speak aloud. Some nights, when the workshop was particularly quiet and the autumn wind rattled the windows the same way it had on that terrible Tuesday, Dax would catch himself listening for sounds that would never come again. Emma's voice calling, "Daddy, look what I made." Sarah's humming as she sketched new ideas for her paintings. The comfortable chaos of a life filled with people who loved him. But those moments of weakness were brief. Dax had built walls around his heart as carefully and precisely as he built his furniture, each board measured, each joint fitted perfectly, each nail driven home with deliberate force. Those walls had protected him for 2 years, and he intended to keep them standing for the rest of his life. The workshop had become his sanctuary and his prison, the place where he could create beautiful things for other people's homes, while ensuring his own remained empty. He told himself it was enough. It had to be enough. Because letting anyone pass those walls again would mean risking the kind of pain that had nearly destroyed him the first time. As evening shadows began to lengthen across the workshop floor, Dax stepped back to examine his progress on the dining table. The grain of the cherry wood caught the light beautifully, and the joinery was flawless. Some family would gather around this table for years to come, sharing meals and making memories, and taking for granted the precious fragility of their happiness. He ran his hand along the smooth surface one final time, then began cleaning his tools with the same methodical care he brought to everything else. Tomorrow would bring another project, another day of purposeful solitude, another 24 hours of the carefully controlled life he had built from the ashes of his former existence. Outside, the first drops of an evening storm began to tap against the workshop windows, and Dax glanced up briefly before returning to his work. Weather was just weather now. Rain was just rain. He had learned not to read omens or meaning into the movements of the natural world. He had no way of knowing that this particular storm would change everything. The storm that hit Willowbrook that October evening came without the usual warnings. No gradual buildup of clouds, no gentle preliminary drizzle. One moment the sky was merely overcast, and the next, it unleashed a fury that seemed almost personal in its intensity. Thunder cracked overhead like artillery fire, and lightning illuminated the workshop windows in stark white flashes that made Dax's tools throw bizarre shadows across the walls. By 8 o'clock, the rain was falling in sheets so thick it transformed the world beyond the windows into an impressionist painting of gray and black. The wind howled around the converted barn with enough force to make the solid wooden structure groan in protest. Dax had seen plenty of storms in his 34 years, but this one felt different, angrier, more desperate, as if the sky itself was trying to wash something clean. He was putting the finishing touches on a jewelry box, a commission for Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter's Sweet 16, when the power flickered. Once, twice, then died completely, plunging the workshop into darkness broken only by the intermittent lightning. Dax felt around for the battery-powered lantern he kept for such occasions, its warm glow creating a small circle of normalcy in the chaos. The sound of the storm was deafening now, rain hammering against the roof, wind whistling through every gap and seam, and underneath it all, a rumbling thunder that seemed to shake the very foundation of the building. Dax had weathered worse storms in this workshop, but never alone. Sarah used to make hot chocolate on nights like this, while Emma built blanket forts in the living area upstairs. They would all crowd together, watching the lightning show through the windows and counting the seconds between flash and thunder. He pushed the memory away with practiced efficiency and focused on securing his tools. The last thing he needed was for something to fall and break during the night. As he moved through the darkened workshop, guided by the lantern's glow and 20 years of muscle memory, another sound cut through the storm's symphony, preparing. And narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It was faint at first, almost lost in the wind, a rhythmic pounding that didn't match the random percussion of rain against wood. Dax froze, listening. There it was again, deliberate, urgent. Someone was knocking on his door. No one came to the workshop after hours, especially not in weather like this. The rational part of his mind suggested it might be a tree branch or piece of debris thrown against the door by the wind. But the pattern was too regular, too purposeful. Someone was out there in this nightmare of a storm, desperate enough to seek shelter wherever they could find it. For a moment, Dax stood paralyzed by indecision. His carefully constructed isolation demanded that he ignore the knocking, wait for whoever it was to move on to another building, another solution. The walls he had built around his heart whispered that opening that door would only lead to complications he couldn't afford. But the knocking came again, weaker now, and underneath it he could hear something that made his chest tighten with recognition. The sound of someone crying. Not just crying, someone trying desperately not to cry, the kind of muffled sobs that came from someone at the very end of their rope. Before his conscious mind could overrule the decision, Dax's feet were carrying him toward the front door. His hand hesitated on the deadbolt for just a moment before turning it with a heavy click. The wind immediately tried to tear the door from his grasp as he pulled it open, and rain swept into the workshop like a living thing. In the pale circle of his lantern's light stood a woman and two small boys, all three of them soaked to the bone and shivering violently. The woman couldn't have been more than 28 or 30, with dark hair plastered to her head and wide eyes that reflected the lantern's glow like a startled deer. Her clothes, a simple blue dress and thin cardigan, clung to her obviously pregnant form, and she had one protective arm around each of the boys. The twins appeared to be about 6 years old, identical except for the fact that one wore a red jacket and the other wore blue. Both jackets were threadbare and offered little protection against the storm's assault. The boys pressed close to their mother's sides, their small faces pale with cold and fear. "Please," the woman said, and her voice carried an accent that Dax couldn't immediately place something European, refined despite the desperation. "Please, I know it's late, but we have nowhere else to go. Our car broke down about a mile back, and the storm ... She gestured helplessly at the chaos surrounding them, realized he had been staring for several long seconds without moving. The woman was clearly exhausted, probably hypothermic, and pregnant enough that standing in this weather could be dangerous for both her and her unborn baby. The boys were beginning to shake so hard their teeth chattered audibly. "Come in," he sighed, stepping back and gesturing them inside. "Quickly, before you all catch pneumonia." They stumbled into the workshop, water streaming from their clothes onto his carefully maintained floors. The woman immediately began fussing over the boys, trying to wring water from their jackets and smooth their wet hair away from their faces. There was something almost automatic about her movements, the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to caring for others, even when she clearly needed care herself. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with relief and something else surprise, perhaps as if she hadn't expected anyone to show such basic kindness. "Thank you so much. I'm Serafina, and these are my sons, Oliver and Lucas." "Dax," he replied simply, then immediately felt awkward for not offering more. 2 years of isolation had left him rusty at basic human interaction. "You said your car broke down?" Serafina nodded, unconsciously placing a protective hand over her swollen belly. "The engine started smoking, then just died. I tried to call for help, but there's no cell service in this storm, and we couldn't stay with the car. It was getting so cold, and the boys." She trailed off, looking around the workshop with obvious confusion. "I'm sorry, I thought this was a house. I saw the light and just hoped ... It's a workshop," Dax explained. "I live upstairs. You can't go back out in this weather. The storm's supposed to last until morning." He paused, realizing what he was about to offer and fighting every instinct that told him to reconsider. "You can stay here tonight, all of you." The relief that flooded Seraphine's face was so profound that Dax had to look away. When was the last time his simple kindness had meant so much to someone? When was the last time he had even offered simple kindness? "We don't want to impose," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was clearly at the end of her strength, held upright only by the need to care for her boys. "You're not imposing," Dax heard himself say. "Come on, let's get you upstairs where it's warm. We need to get those wet clothes off the boys before they get sick." As he led them toward the narrow staircase that connected the workshop to his apartment, Dax couldn't help but notice the way Serafina moved, with a strange combination of exhaustion and natural grace that spoke of breeding and education. Her accent was becoming more pronounced now that the immediate crisis had passed. Definitely European, and there was something about the way she held herself, even soaked in pregnant and desperate, that suggested she wasn't used to asking for help. But those observations were fleeting, overwhelmed by the immediate practical concerns of getting 3 strangers warm and dry. As they climbed the stairs, the boys flanking their mother like small guardians, Dax found himself wondering what series of events had brought a pregnant European woman and her twin sons to his workshop door in the middle of the worst storm Willowbrook had seen in years. He had no way of knowing that the answer to that question would unravel secrets that stretched across an ocean and back to a royal court where Seraphine's disappearance had set in motion a chain of events that would soon reach even this small American town. The apartment above the workshop was as sparse and functional as the man who lived there. A single room served as living area, kitchen, and dining space, with just a bedroom and bathroom branching off to one side. Everything was clean and precisely arranged, but it had the sterile quality of a place where someone existed rather than lived. No personal touches, no family photos, no hints of the life that had once filled these walls with warmth. Serafina stood dripping in the doorway, taking in the stark simplicity while Oliver and Lucas pressed close to her sides. The boys were shivering so hard their small bodies seemed to vibrate, and their lips had taken on a worrying blue tinge that made Dax's chest tighten with unexpected concern. "Bathrooms through there," he said gruffly, pointing toward the single bedroom. "Get those wet clothes off the boys first. I'll find some dry things." While Serafina guided Oliver and Lucas toward the bathroom, Dax rummaged through his dresser drawers with growing frustration. Everything he owned was adult-sized, designed for a man who had systematically removed all traces of the family he'd lost. Finally, he found 2 old t-shirts that he'd been meaning to donate. They would swallow the boys, but at least they were dry and warm. He knocked softly on the bathroom door. "I have some clothes for them," he called. The door opened a crack, and Seraphine's face appeared, her dark hair still dripping onto her shoulders. Up close, even bedraggled from the storm, there was something almost regal about her bone structure, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and eyes that were an unusual shade of violet blue that seemed to see more than they revealed. "Thank you," she said quietly, accepting the shirts. "You're very kind." Dax wanted to correct her, to explain that this wasn't kindness but simple human decency, but something in her tone stopped him. She spoke the words as if kindness was a rare gift she'd learned not to expect. He found himself wondering what kind of life she'd been living. That basic hospitality seemed so remarkable. 20 minutes later, Oliver and Lucas emerged from the bathroom looking like they were wearing tents. The t-shirts hung nearly to their knees, and they had to roll the sleeves up multiple times to free their hands. But they were dry, and their color was returning to normal, which was all that mattered. "Better?" Dax asked, and was surprised when both boys nodded solemnly at him. They were identical in most ways, the same dark hair as their mother, the same violet blue eyes, the same serious expressions that seemed too mature for 6-year-olds. But Oliver held himself with a slight protective stance near his mother, while Lucas seemed more curious about his surroundings, his gaze taking in every detail of the sparse apartment. "Now you," Dax said to Serafina, who was still standing in her soaked dress, her arms wrapped around herself. She hesitated. "I don't want to impose any further ... You're pregnant and hypothermic," Dax said bluntly. "That's not negotiable." He found her one of his flannel shirts and a pair of sweatpants with a drawstring waist. They would be enormous on her, but they were the best he could offer. While she changed, he put a kettle on the small stove and pulled together what he could for a late dinner. His pantry was designed for a single man, with simple tastes: canned soup, crackers, instant hot chocolate for emergencies like this. The boys sat silently at his small table, their hands folded in their laps with an almost formal politeness that struck Dax as unusual. Most 6-year-olds he remembered were bundles of energy and questions, but Oliver and Lucas waited quietly, watching him move around the kitchen with alert, careful eyes. "Are you hungry?" he asked them. They nodded but didn't speak, glancing toward the bathroom where their mother was changing, as if seeking permission. They couldn't ask for doubt when Serafina emerged, swimming in his oversized clothes. Dax was struck again by that strange contradiction he'd noticed earlier. Even dressed in his baggy flannel and with her hair still damp, she moved with an unconscious elegance that spoke of breeding and education. She had the kind of posture that was taught, not learned: straight spine, controlled gestures, the way she held her head that suggested she was accustomed to being watched and judged. "Much better, thank you," she said, settling carefully at the table beside her sons. The pregnancy was more obvious now without the loose dress to disguise it. She looked to be about 7 months along. Dax ladled soup into 4 mismatched bowls and distributed crackers around the table. It was the first time in 2 years that he'd shared a meal with anyone, and the silence felt heavy and awkward. He was out of practice with conversation, especially with strangers, especially with families. "The storm should pass by morning," he said finally, focusing on practical matters. "I can drive you into town then, help you figure out what to do about your car." "That's very generous," Serafina replied. "We've already put you to enough trouble." "Where were you heading?" Dax asked, then immediately wondered if that was too personal a question. He'd lost the ability to navigate normal social boundaries. Seraphine's hand tightened slightly around her spoon. "We were traveling to my sister's house in Maine. She's expecting us." Something in her tone suggested this wasn't entirely true, but Dax didn't press. Everyone had their reasons for moving, for running, for starting over somewhere new. He understood better than most the need to escape from a past that had become too painful to bear. Oliver finished his soup first and looked up at Dax with serious eyes. "Sir?" he said quietly, and his accent was as refined as his mother's, tinged with something that sounded vaguely British. "Thank you for helping us." The formal politeness of it, the careful pronunciation, caught Dax off guard. "You're welcome," he managed. "Oliver Lucas," Serafina said gently. "Perhaps you should get some rest. Where will they sleep?" Dax asked, suddenly realizing he hadn't thought through the logistics of housing 3 unexpected guests. "The couch will be fine for all of us," Serafina said quickly. "We don't want to take your bed." Dax looked at the narrow 2-seater couch, then at the pregnant woman who could barely fit in it alone, let alone with 2 growing boys. "No," he said decisively. "You take the bedroom. The boys can have the couch, and He paused, realizing he'd just volunteered to sleep on the floor of his own apartment. "We couldn't possibly," Serafina began. "It's one night," Dax interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "You need proper rest." Later, after he'd found extra blankets and pillows, after he'd checked that the boys were settled on the couch and Serafina was comfortable in his bedroom, Dax lay on the floor of his living room listening to the storm rage outside. The apartment felt different with other people in it, warmer somehow, filled with the soft sounds of breathing and the occasional creak of someone shifting in sleep. For the first time in 2 years, he wasn't alone with his grief and guilt. The silence that had been his constant companion was broken by the presence of 3 strangers who had stumbled into his carefully controlled existence by accident. As he finally drifted toward sleep, Dax found himself wondering about the woman in his bedroom, about the story behind her refined accent and formal manner, about what had brought a pregnant widow and her well-mannered sons to his door in the middle of nowhere. There was something about Serafina Blackwood that didn't quite add up, something that suggested her past held secrets she wasn't ready to share. But those were questions for tomorrow. Tonight, for the first time in years, Dax Ironwood fell asleep to the sound of other people's breathing, and he found it strangely comforting. Dawn broke gray and quiet over Willowbrook, the fury of the previous night's storm reduced to a gentle patter of rain against the windows. Dax woke to the unfamiliar sound of hushed voices. Serafina speaking softly to the boys in what he now recognized as a mixture of English and what sounded like French or Italian. The conversation was too quiet to understand, but there was something musical about the rhythm of her words, the way the foreign syllables flowed together with an elegance that spoke of education and culture. He lay still for a moment, disoriented by the presence of other people in his space. For 2 years, he had awakened to silence so complete it sometimes felt like being entombed. Now his apartment hummed with life, the soft shuffle of small feet, the creak of floorboards, the gentle murmur of a mother checking on her sons. He finally sat up, his back protesting from a night on the hard floor. He found Oliver and Lucas standing quietly by the window, still wearing his oversized t-shirts like small ghosts draped in white linen. They were looking down at the workshop yard where puddles reflected the cloudy sky like scattered mirrors. "Good morning," he said, his voice rougher than usual from sleep. Both boys turned and, in perfect unison, offered him small formal bows. "Good morning, Mr. Ironwood," they said together, their accents crisp and careful. Dax blinked, surprised by the gesture. It was old-fashioned, almost courtly in its precision. "Just Dax is fine," he said. "How did you sleep?" "Very well, thank you," Oliver replied while Lucas nodded agreement. "Your couch is quite comfortable." The politeness was charming, but unnatural for 6-year-olds. Most kids, he remembered, were more likely to complain about being uncomfortable or demand breakfast the moment they woke up. These boys seemed to have been trained in social graces that belonged to a different era, or perhaps a different social class entirely. Serafina emerged from the bedroom, her hair neatly braided and her face washed, though she still wore his oversized clothes. "I hope we didn't wake you," she said. "The boys are early risers." "It's fine," Dax said, running a hand through his own disheveled hair. "I usually get up early myself." "Coffee? That would be wonderful, thank you." As Dax moved around the small kitchen, he became aware of Serafina watching him with the same careful attention her sons had shown the night before. There was something almost analytical about her gaze, as if she was taking careful mental notes about his movements, his habits, his character. "The storm has passed," she observed, accepting a mug of coffee with grateful hands. "We should be able to leave soon and stop imposing on your kindness." Something in her tone suggested she wasn't entirely eager to leave, despite her words. Dax found himself saying, "There's no rush. The roads will need time to clear, and you said your car broke down. We should probably take a look at it first, see if it's salvageable." Relief flickered across her features so quickly he might have imagined it. "If you're certain we're not too much trouble, ... "You're not," he said, and meant it more than he'd expected to. Over breakfast scrambled eggs and toast that he somehow managed to stretch into a meal for four, the conversation began to flow more naturally. The boys asked polite questions about his woodworking, and Dax found himself explaining the different types of wood and tools with an enthusiasm he hadn't felt in years. "My father used to work with his hands," Serafina said quietly, watching her sons listen with rapt attention. "He said there was something honest about creating useful beauty from raw materials." "What did he do?" Dax asked. A shadow passed over her face. "He ... managed estates. Large properties with historical significance. He believed in preserving beautiful things for future generations." She paused, then added, "He passed away when the boys were babies." The way she said it, the careful choice of words, made Dax suspect there was more to the story. But he recognized the tone of someone who had learned to edit their past for public consumption. He knew something about that himself. "And your husband?" he asked gently. Seraphine's hand moved instinctively to cover her wedding ring, a simple gold band that looked too plain for someone with her refined manner. "Car accident," she said simply. "6 months ago. That's when we decided to ... start fresh. Somewhere new." "Where new?" Dax nodded, understanding completely. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." She looked up at him with those remarkable violet eyes. "Sarah told me about your wife and daughter." "I'm sorry too." For a moment, he was confused, then realized she must have seen the single photograph he'd forgotten to remove. The one tucked behind the coffee maker that showed Sarah and Emma laughing at some long-forgotten joke. He'd thought he'd erased all traces of his former life, but apparently he'd missed one. "It was 2 years ago," he said, the words coming easier than they had in months. "Drunk driver." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who understood the weight of sudden loss and the struggle to build something new from the wreckage. "Papa," Lucas said suddenly, looking up from his eggs. "May we see Mr. Dax's workshop?" Serafina corrected him gently. "It's may we see Dax's workshop, sweetheart. And only if he doesn't mind." The correction was automatic but telling. She was teaching them to adapt their speech, to blend in with less formal surroundings. Dax filed the observation away with all the other small inconsistencies he'd noticed about this unusual family. "I'd be happy to show you around," he said, surprised to find he genuinely meant it. An hour later, they were all downstairs in the workshop. The boys moved through the space with wide-eyed wonder, touching tools with reverent fingers and asking dozens of questions about everything from wood grain to joinery techniques. Their curiosity was infectious, reminding Dax of the joy he'd once found in his craft. Serafina watched from near the workbench, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other trailing along the smooth surface of the dining table he'd been working on. "This is exquisite," she said softly. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary." There was something in her voice that suggested she knew quality when she saw it, that she was accustomed to fine things. Yet another piece of the puzzle that was Serafina Blackwood. "Would you like to try?" Dax asked Oliver, who had been staring longingly at a small handplane. The boy's face lit up with delight. "May I?" Under Dax's careful guidance, Oliver learned to hold the tool properly and make smooth, even strokes along a piece of practice wood. Lucas watched jealously until Dax found him a smaller plane to try. Soon both boys were working intently, their tongues poking out in concentration as they created their first wood shavings. "They're naturals," Serafina observed, and her smile was the first completely unguarded expression Dax had seen from her. It transformed her face, making her look younger and more accessible. "Emma used to love this too," Dax said without thinking, then froze. He hadn't spoken his daughter's name aloud in over a year. Serafina looked at him with gentle understanding. "She would have liked them, I think. They're good boys." "They are," Dax agreed, watching Oliver help Lucas adjust his grip on the plane. "You've raised them well. They're polite, thoughtful, unusual for their age." Something flickered in Seraphine's eyes, pride mixed with what might have been worry. "They've had to grow up quickly," she said carefully. "Our circumstances have required a certain maturity from them." Another piece of the puzzle. Dax was beginning to understand that Serafina and her sons were refugees from something, not just grief and loss, but perhaps something more complicated. The way she chose her words, the boys' formal mannerisms, the careful way she avoided specifics about their past, it all suggested they were hiding from more than just painful memories. As the morning wore on, something shifted in the workshop's atmosphere. For the first time in 2 years, the space was filled with laughter and conversation, with the sounds of learning and creation. Dax found himself smiling more than he had since the accident, caught up in the boys' enthusiasm and warmed by Seraphine's quiet presence. Lucas accidentally dropped his plane and immediately burst into apologetic tears. Dax knelt beside him without thinking. "Hey, it's okay," he said gently. "Tools get dropped sometimes. That's why we practice." Lucas looked up at him with huge, grateful eyes. "You're not angry?" "Of course not. Accidents happen." The boys' relief was so profound that Dax wondered what kind of environment they'd come from, where a simple mistake could cause such distress. He glanced at Serafina and saw her watching the interaction with an expression that mixed gratitude with something that looked almost like fear. Whatever they were running from, Dax realized, it had taught them to expect punishment for the smallest failures. And whatever secret Serafina was keeping, it was big enough to make her very, very careful about whom she trusted. But as he watched her relax slightly, as he saw the boys begin to lose some of their formal stiffness, he found himself hoping she might eventually trust him enough to share the truth. It was on the third day, when Serafina had insisted on helping him finish the cherry dining table, despite her pregnancy, that everything changed. They had fallen into an easy rhythm over the past 48 hours, Serafina proving surprisingly knowledgeable about woodworking techniques, the boys eagerly learning every skill Dax was willing to teach them, and all of them sharing meals. That had somehow become the highlight of Dax's days. The car, as expected, had been beyond simple repair. The engine had thrown a rod, and the cost of fixing it would far exceed the vehicle's value. This news had prompted a careful conversation about next steps, during which Serafina had grown increasingly evasive about her sister in Maine and their expected arrival date. Dax suspected there was no sister, but he didn't press. Whatever story she needed to tell herself to feel safe staying here was fine with him, because somewhere between Oliver's first successful wood joint and Lucas's delighted laughter when Dax taught him to whistle through his fingers, Dax had realized something that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. He didn't want them to leave. For the first time in 2 years, his apartment felt like a home. For the first time since the accident, he woke up looking forward to the day ahead. The boys had brought back sounds he'd forgotten. He missed running footsteps overhead, excited voices discussing their latest discoveries, the particular brand of chaos that only young people could create. And Serafina had brought back something he'd thought was gone forever, the possibility of companionship, of sharing his life with someone who understood both his grief and his healing. She was standing at the workbench, carefully applying the final coat of oil finish to the table's surface when she suddenly went very still. The brush froze in her hand, and her face went pale with what Dax instantly recognized as pain. "Serafina?" He was at her side in 3 quick steps. "What's wrong?" She tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace, just a twinge. "The baby's been active today." She started to continue working, but another wave of pain made her gasp and grip the edge of the workbench. "That's not a twinge," Dax said firmly. "Sit down, now." "I'm fine, really," she began, but her words were cut off by a sharp intake of breath that told them both she was anything but fine. Oliver and Lucas, who had been assembling a small birdhouse at the other end of the workshop, looked up with the instant alertness of youngsters who had learned to read their mother's distress signals. They were beside her in moments, their small faces creased with worry. "Mama?" Lucas whispered, taking her hand. Serafina forced another smile for her son's benefit. "It's all right, darling. Sometimes the baby just needs to remind us he's there." But Dax could see the way she was breathing short, controlled breaths that spoke of someone managing pain. He could also see the way her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed Oliver's hair in reassurance. "We're calling Dr. Patterson," he said decisively. "No," Serafina said quickly, too quickly. "I mean, I'm sure it's nothing serious." "We shouldn't." "Bother. It's not a bother," Dax interrupted. "Dr. Patterson has been delivering babies in this county for 30 years. If there's anything to worry about, she know." Something in Seraphine's expression shifted, a flicker of what looked almost like panic. "I don't have. That is, my medical records aren't. It's complicated." Another piece of the puzzle. Dax was beginning to understand that everything about Serafina Blackwood was complicated, layered with secrets she guarded as carefully as crown jewels. But right now, the only thing that mattered was making sure she and her baby were safe. "Then we'll figure it out," he said simply. "But we're not taking chances with your health or the baby's." Dr. Patterson arrived within 20 minutes, her silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun and her medical bag in hand. She was a woman who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing, which made her the perfect person to handle whatever complications might arise from Seraphine's mysterious circumstances. While the doctor examined Serafina in the bedroom, Dax kept Oliver and Lucas occupied in the living area, but he could hear the low murmur of conversation through the thin walls. At one point, Dr. Patterson's voice rose slightly in what sounded like surprise, and Dax found himself straining to catch the words. Never seen documentation like this, He heard, followed by Seraphine's voice, too quiet to understand but with an urgency that made his chest tighten with worry. 20 minutes later, Dr. Patterson emerged with a thoughtful expression. "She's fine," she announced, and Dax felt his shoulders sag with relief. False alarm Braxton Hicks contractions, brought on by stress and overexertion. The baby's healthy and right on schedule. "Thank goodness," Dax said, meaning it more than he'd expected to. Dr. Patterson studied him with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "She needs rest and no heavy lifting. Someone should keep an eye on her for the next few days." She paused meaningfully. "I assume that someone will be you?" The assumption in her voice made something warm bloom in Dax's chest. Somewhere along the way, without him noticing, the people of Willowbrook had begun thinking of Serafina and the boys as his responsibility. His family. "Of course," he said. After the doctor left, Serafina emerged from the bedroom, looking embarrassed and grateful in equal measure. The boys immediately flanked her, and Dax was struck again by their protective instincts, too mature for 6-year-olds, as if they'd learned early to be guardians rather than simply sons. "I'm sorry for the scare," she said softly, "and for the doctor's questions. I'm afraid my situation is unusual." "How unusual?" Dax asked gently. Serafina looked at Oliver and Lucas, then back at him, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she sat down heavily at the small table and gestured for them all to join her. "The truth is," she began carefully, "my late husband wasn't just anyone. He was, well, his family has certain expectations about bloodlines and inheritance, titles that pass through generations." She paused, choosing her words with obvious care. "When he died, those expectations transferred to our unborn baby. There are people who believe they have a say in how this offspring should be raised, where we should live, what kind of life we should lead." Dax felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of people? The kind with lawyers and influence, and very strong opinions about propriety, Serafina said quietly. The kind who think a widow and her sons have no business making their own choices about their future. It wasn't the whole truth. Dax could sense that, but it was clearly all she felt safe sharing. And it was enough to explain the fear he'd seen in her eyes, the careful way she spoke about their past, the boy's unusual formality. "They don't know where you are," he said. "It wasn't a question. Not yet," she admitted. "But they have resources. Eventually they'll find us. They always do." Oliver and Lucas exchanged a look that spoke of conversations they'd overheard, fears they'd learned to carry. 6-year-olds shouldn't have to worry about people with lawyers and influence hunting them down. 6-year-olds shouldn't have to practice being someone other than who they were born to be. Dax looked around his apartment, at the boys who had brought laughter back into his life, at the woman who had reminded him what it felt like to care about someone's well-being, at the family that had somehow formed from the wreckage of all their separate losses. The thought of these people with their lawyers and influence taking them away, of returning to the silence and emptiness that had defined his existence for 2 years, was unbearable. "Then we don't let them find you," he said simply. Serafina stared at him. "Dax, you don't understand what you're saying. These aren't people you want to cross. They have the power to make life very difficult for anyone who gets in their way." "Let me worry about that," Dax said. "You're not going anywhere, not unless you want to." The relief that flooded her face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. For the first time since she'd arrived, Serafina Blackwood looked like a woman who didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. "We want to stay," Oliver said quietly, speaking for all of them, "if you'll have us." Dax looked at this makeshift family that had stumbled into his life during a storm and somehow managed to weather every storm that followed. They fit here in ways that had nothing to do with blood or law or social expectation. They fit because they belonged together, because they'd all found in each other something they'd been missing. "I'll have you," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being, "for as long as you want to stay." What he didn't say, what he was only beginning to understand himself, was that he would fight anyone who tried to take them away from him. Lawyers, influence, and all. They came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Serafina and the boys had settled into what felt like a permanent rhythm of family life. Dax was teaching Lucas how to sand wood grain when the sound of expensive car engines purring down the gravel drive made them all freeze. Through the workshop windows, he could see 2 black sedans, the kind that cost more than most people made in a year, pulling up with the precision of a military operation. Serafina went white as parchment, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly. "They found us," she whispered, and the terror in her voice made Dax's blood run cold. "Who found us?" Oliver asked, but his question was answered when the car doors opened, and 4 people emerged with the bearing of those accustomed to being obeyed without question. The leader was a woman in her 50s, elegantly dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Dax's truck. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, and she moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having heard the word "no" applied to herself. Behind her walked a younger man in expensive overcoat, carrying a briefcase that looked like it could fund a small country. The other 2 were clearly security, well-dressed but alert, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. "Lady Pemberton," Serafina breathed, And something in the way she said the name made it clear this wasn't just an unwelcome visitor, but a figure of genuine authority. Lady Pemberton approached the workshop door with the measured stride of someone conducting official business. When she knocked, it wasn't a request but a demand. Dax looked at Serafina, who seemed frozen by a mixture of terror and resignation. The boys had moved closer to their mother, forming the same protective circle he'd noticed that first night. But now their formal training was evident in the way they straightened their spines and lifted their chins, as if preparing for an inspection. "Stay here," Dax told them quietly, and went to answer the door. Lady Pemberton's pale blue eyes assessed him with the kind of thoroughness usually reserved for livestock auctions. "Mr. Ironwood, I presume," she said in an accent that spoke of British boarding schools and generational privilege. "I am Lady Victoria Pemberton, representing the interests of the House of Velthorn. I believe you have something that belongs to us." The casual arrogance of referring to people as property made Dax's jaw clench. "I don't believe I have anything that belongs to you, Lady Pemberton. I think you do." She gestured to the man with the briefcase, who stepped forward and opened it to reveal an array of official-looking documents. "Perhaps we might speak with Princess Serafina. I'm sure she can clarify the situation." Princess. The word hit Dax like a physical blow, reframing everything he thought he knew about the woman who had been sharing his life for the past 3 weeks. But even as his mind reeled with the implications, his protective instincts kicked in. "I'm afraid I don't know anyone by that title," he said evenly. Lady Pemberton's smile was sharp as winter ice. "Come now, Mr. Ironwood. Did you really think you could hide the Crown Princess of Velthorn in a small American town indefinitely? Her Highness has responsibilities that extend far beyond her personal preferences." Behind him, Dax heard Seraphine's soft intake of breath, followed by Oliver's quiet voice. "Mama?" Lady Pemberton's attention shifted past Dax to the family grouped behind him. "Your Highness," she said, and her tone carried the weight of centuries of protocol. "His Majesty has been most concerned about your extended absence. The Council of Regents has begun to question the wisdom of allowing you to grieve without proper guidance." Serafina stepped forward, and Dax watched in fascination as her entire bearing transformed. The careful humility she'd shown for weeks melted away, replaced by a regal composure that made her seem suddenly taller, more formidable. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that had clearly been trained from birth. "Lady Pemberton," she said coolly, "I wasn't aware that grief had a time limit prescribed by the Council." "Under normal circumstances, it doesn't," Lady Pemberton replied. "But your circumstances are hardly normal, Your Highness. You are carrying the heir to the throne of Velthorn. That offspring cannot be born in these conditions." Her dismissive glance around the workshop made it clear what she thought of Dax's humble life. "This baby," Serafina said, her hand moving protectively to her belly, "is my offspring. Not the Council's, not the throne's. Mine. With respect, Your Highness, that's where you're mistaken." The man with the briefcase stepped forward, pulling out a thick document bound in blue ribbon. Upon the death of Crown Prince Michael, the Velthorn Succession Act was invoked. Any heirs born to the royal line are wards of the crown until they reach their majority. The Council has both the right and the duty to ensure proper upbringing. Oliver and Lucas had moved even closer to their mother, and Dax could see the confusion and fear in their young faces. They were beginning to understand that this conversation threatened everything they'd found here, everything that had made them feel safe and loved. "Furthermore," Lady Pemberton continued, "the Princes Oliver and Lucas are also subjects of Velthorn law. Their education and upbringing must be overseen by the royal household to ensure they understand their duties and obligations. They're 6 years old," Dax said, unable to remain silent any longer. "They're not subjects or wards or political pawns. They're youngsters who found a home where they're loved and protected." Lady Pemberton's gaze turned to him with the kind of disdain usually reserved for insects. "And you are?" "I'm the man who's going to make sure they stay safe and happy," Dax said firmly. "Whatever that takes." "How quaint," Lady Pemberton said. "Mr. Ironwood, I'm sure you mean well, but you're interfering in matters of international law and royal succession. The House of Velthorn has treaties with your government that supersede any emotional attachments you may have formed." She gestured to one of the security men, who stepped forward with his own briefcase. "We have extradition documents, custody orders, and diplomatic immunity. Her Highness and the princes will be returning to Velthorn immediately to resume their proper roles in the royal household." "No," Serafina said, and the single word rang with absolute finality. "I will not return. My sons will not return. And my unborn offspring will be born free, not as a ward of the crown." "Your Highness, Lady," Pemberton said, her voice taking on a harder edge, "you seem to have forgotten that defying the crown is treason. Even for a princess." "Then I choose treason," Serafina replied. "I choose my family over my title." The confrontation might have escalated further, but at that moment, the sound of multiple vehicles approaching made everyone turn. Dax looked out to see half the population of Willowbrook driving up his road pickup trucks, family cars, and even Pastor Reynolds on his old motorcycle. News traveled fast in a small town, and apparently, the arrival of mysterious government-looking officials had triggered the community's protective instincts. Mrs. Patterson climbed out of her bakery van, armed with a rolling pin and a formidable scowl. Behind her came the hardware store owner, the postal clerk, 2 teachers from the elementary school, and at least a dozen other townspeople Dax recognized from his years of living quietly among them. "Everything all right here, Dax?" called out Jim Morrison from the hardware store, his voice carrying the kind of casual authority that came from being a pillar of the community. "Lady," Pemberton looked around at the gathering crowd with obvious distaste. "This is a private matter of international law," she announced. "These people have no legal standing in this situation." "Maybe not," said Mrs. Patterson, stepping forward with her rolling pin still in hand. "But we've got standing in this community. And Serafina and those boys are part of our community now." Pastor Reynolds moved to stand beside Dax. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the law and what's right aren't the same thing. And sometimes ordinary people have to stand up and decide which one matters more." Lady Pemberton's composure began to crack slightly as she realized she was outnumbered by people who clearly didn't care about royal protocol or diplomatic immunity. "This is highly irregular," she said. "You're interfering with a sovereign nation's internal affairs." "We're protecting our neighbors," Jim Morrison said simply. "And around here, that's what we do." As the standoff continued, Dax felt something shift inside him. These people, his community, had rallied to defend a family they barely knew because it was the right thing to do. They were willing to face down representatives of a foreign government because they understood that love and belonging trumped law and tradition. And if they could show that kind of courage, then he could too. The tension in the workshop yard had reached a breaking point. Lady Pemberton stood surrounded by documents that proclaimed the authority of a distant crown, while the people of Willowbrook formed a protective circle around a family they had chosen to defend. Dax could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on all of them. This was the decision that would define not just his future, but the future of everyone he had come to love. "This has gone far enough," Lady Pemberton announced, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. She gestured to the security men, who began moving towards Serafina and the boys. "Your Highness, the princes and the unborn heir will come with us now. This gathering changes nothing about the law." But as the men approached, the crowd of townspeople shifted, creating a human barrier between the royal representatives and the family. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her rolling pin raised like a weapon, while Jim Morrison crossed his arms and planted his feet like a man who had no intention of moving. "I don't think so," Jim said calmly. Serafina and those boys are under our protection now. You're obstructing justice, the man with the briefcase said, his cultured voice tight with frustration. We have every legal right to retrieve these. Royal subjects. Legal according to who? Pastor Reynolds asked, stepping up beside Mrs. Patterson. Last I checked, this was American soil, and on American soil, we protect families from being torn apart. Lady Pemberton's composure finally cracked completely. You people have no idea what you're interfering with, she snapped. The House of Velthorn has existed for 800 years. We have alliances with governments around the world. You cannot simply decide to ignore centuries of law and tradition because you've developed sentimental attachments. That was when Dax stepped forward, moving past the protective circle of his neighbors to stand directly in front of Lady Pemberton. When he spoke, his voice carried across the yard with quiet authority. You want to know what I've decided? He sighed. I've decided that 800 years of law and tradition don't mean a damn thing if they're used to tear apart a family that belongs together. He turned to face the gathered crowd, these people who had barely known him 2 years ago, but had still come running when they sensed he needed them. 3 weeks ago, a woman and 2 boys showed up at my door in the middle of a storm. They were cold, scared, and running from people who wanted to control their lives. I let them in, and they gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Reason to care about tomorrow. His voice grew stronger as he continued. I don't care if she's a princess or a pauper. I don't care if those boys are princes or peasants. What I care about is that Oliver laughs when he's learning to whittle, and Lucas hums while he's working on his birdhouse. What I care about is that Serafina feels safe enough to fall asleep without worrying about who might be coming for her. Family in the night. Lady Pemberton opened her mouth to interrupt, but Dax wasn't finished. You want to talk about law and tradition? He said, his gaze shifting back to her. Here's what I know about both. There's no law that says a mother can't choose where her baby is born. There's no tradition that's more important than keeping a family together. And there's no crown in the world that has the right to tell 2 6-year-olds that their happiness doesn't matter. The crowd murmured their agreement, and Dax felt their support like a physical force behind him. But it was when he looked at Serafina, really looked at her, that he found the words that mattered most. Serafina, he said, and his voice was gentler now, meant for her alone, even though everyone could hear. You told me once that your late husband's family believed they had a say in how your offspring should be raised. But they're wrong. You're not just a princess carrying an heir, you're a mother carrying her baby. You're not just a royal subject. Following orders, you're a woman who has the right to choose her own life. Tears were streaming down Seraphine's face now, but when she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. I renounce my claim to the throne of Velthorn, she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. I renounce my title, my privileges, and any rights or obligations that come with royal blood. I choose to be Serafina Blackwood, mother of Oliver, Lucas, and the baby I carry. Nothing more, nothing less. Lady Pemberton looked as if she'd been physically struck. Your Highness, you cannot simply renounce. I can and I have, Serafina interrupted, and I'm not your Highness anymore. I'm just Serafina, and these are my sons, not your princes. Oliver and Lucas, who had been listening to the adult conversation with wide eyes, suddenly stepped forward. In unison, they performed the formal bow they had given Dax that first morning, but this time it was directed at Lady Pemberton. Thank you for coming, Oliver said with perfect politeness, but we're staying with our family. This is our home. Now, Lucas added, his small hand slipping into Dax's larger one. The simple gesture, that tiny hand trusting his protection, nearly undid Dax completely. He squeezed gently and found his voice again. You heard them, he said to Lady Pemberton. They've made their choice. We all have. Lady Pemberton looked around the circle of faces townspeople, who had chosen to defy international law for the sake of a family's happiness. A princess who had given up a crown for the right to choose her own destiny. 2 young boys who had found safety with a broken furniture maker. And Dax himself, a man who had learned that healing meant opening your heart to love again, no matter how much it might cost. "This isn't over," she said finally, her voice tight with frustration. "The crown doesn't simply accept renunciations. There will be diplomatic consequences, legal challenges. The government will." The government interrupted. "A new voice will respect the choices made by American citizens on American soil." Everyone turned to see Sheriff Davidson approaching, his uniform crisp and his expression serious, but not unkind. Behind him walked a woman in a business suit who had the bearing of someone accustomed to dealing with international complications. "Lady Pemberton," the woman said, stepping forward with a polite but firm smile. "I'm Rachel Chun from the State Department. I'm afraid I have some news that might complicate your mission here." She pulled out her own set of official documents. "As of this morning, Serafina Blackwood and her sons Oliver and Lucas have been granted emergency asylum status by the United States government. They are under federal protection while their case is reviewed, which means any attempt to remove them from this country would constitute a violation of U.S. sovereignty." The silence that followed was profound. Lady Pemberton stared at the State Department official as if she couldn't quite process what she was hearing. "Furthermore," Rachel Chun continued, "any attempts to pressure, intimidate, or threaten American residents, regardless of their country of origin, will be met with the full force of federal law enforcement." Dax felt something like euphoria rising in his chest. Someone in the government had been watching, had understood what was at stake, and had chosen to protect his family. Lady Pemberton's composure was now completely shattered. "This is highly irregular," she managed. "Sometimes," said Pastor Reynolds, with a gentle smile, "irregular is exactly what the situation calls for." As the royal representatives retreated to their expensive cars, defeated by small-town solidarity and federal intervention, Dax looked around at the community that had rallied to protect his chosen family. These people had risked international incidents and diplomatic complications because they understood something that 800 years of royal tradition had forgotten: that love and belonging were more powerful than law and obligation. Serafina moved to stand beside him, Oliver and Lucas flanking them both, and for the first time since they'd arrived, she looked truly free. No longer a princess in exile, but simply a woman who had chosen her family over her crown, and found that the choice had been worth everything. The story of what happened at Dax Ironwood's workshop spread through Willowbrook like wildfire, and then beyond. Within days, news outlets from 3 states were calling the small town the place where love conquered a crown. But it wasn't the media attention that changed Willowbrook, it was what the townspeople had discovered about themselves when they chose to stand up for what was right. Mrs. Patterson was the first to feel the transformation. The morning after the royal confrontation, she found herself looking at her bakery with new eyes. For 30 years, she had been content to serve the same small community, making the same breads and pastries for the same familiar faces. But watching Serafina choose freedom over privilege had stirred something in her own heart, a recognition that life was meant for more than comfortable routines. That afternoon, she hung a new sign in her window: Safe Harbor Bakery, fresh bread, warm hearts, open doors. Within the week, she had quietly let it be known that anyone fleeing difficult circumstances could find a hot meal and a listening ear at her establishment. No questions asked. The sign became a symbol, and soon other businesses began displaying similar messages of welcome. Jim Morrison at the hardware store started offering free repairs and supplies to anyone who needed help getting back on their feet. Pastor Reynolds announced that the church would serve as an unofficial sanctuary for families seeking refuge from domestic violence or other threats. Dr. Patterson began providing medical care on a sliding scale, with payment plans that amounted to pay what you can, when you can. The transformation wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. The community had tasted the power of collective action, driven by love rather than law, and they were hungry for more. Town meetings that had once focused on mundane issues like road maintenance and snow removal began addressing bigger questions. How could they make Willowbrook a beacon for families in crisis? How could they formalize their commitment to protecting those who had nowhere else to turn? The answer came from an unexpected source. Oliver and Lucas, inspired by the adults' example of standing up for what was right, approached their new teacher with an idea. What if Willowbrook Elementary started a program where students could write letters to other kids around the world who were facing difficult situations? What if they created care packages for families in transition? What if they learned about different cultures and governments so they could better understand when people needed help? The Young Advocates program launched 6 weeks after the Royal Confrontation, with Oliver and Lucas as its first ambassadors. The boys, who had once been trained in formal protocol and diplomatic etiquette, now used those skills to help their classmates understand complex global issues and organize humanitarian projects. Their teacher, amazed by their maturity and insight, reached out to other schools, and soon the program was spreading to neighboring districts. But perhaps the most profound change came in the form of unexpected visitors. Word of Willowbrook's stand had reached far beyond the borders of one small American town. Families fleeing political persecution, domestic abuse, and religious intolerance began finding their way to the community that had proven it would choose compassion over convenience. There was Elena Martinez, a teacher from Central America who arrived with her teenage daughter, running from cartel threats that had made their homeland unlivable. The community rallied around them just as they had for Serafina, finding Elena work at the high school and helping her daughter adjust to her new life. Then came the Olsen family from Denmark, not royalty, but whistleblowers who had exposed corporate corruption and found themselves blacklisted from their careers and communities. Jim Morrison offered the father work at the hardware store, while the mother started a small accounting practice serving local businesses. Each new arrival brought fresh perspectives and skills that enriched the town in unexpected ways. Elena introduced Spanish language classes that became so popular they had to move from the church basement to the school auditorium. Mrs. Olsen's financial expertise helped several struggling businesses develop better systems. A refugee family from Somalia opened a small restaurant that introduced the town to flavors they had never imagined. Serafina found herself at the center of this transformation, becoming an unofficial coordinator for new arrivals. Her experience navigating between world's royal protocol and small-town American life made her uniquely qualified to help others adapt to their new circumstances. She started holding weekly gatherings in the church hall, where newcomers could share their stories, ask for help, and connect with others who understood the challenges of starting over. The gatherings grew into something larger, monthly community celebrations that honored both longtime residents and recent arrivals. These weren't charity events where locals helped unfortunates. They were true celebrations where everyone contributed something valuable. Elena taught traditional dances, the Olsens shared Scandinavian folk songs, and Serafina organized storytelling. Circles where people of all ages could share tales of courage, hope, and new beginnings. Dax, meanwhile, had discovered that his workshop could serve a purpose beyond creating beautiful furniture. Working with Oliver and Lucas, he began teaching woodworking skills to anyone who wanted to learn, teenage boys looking for direction, fathers wanting to bond with their offspring, even elderly residents seeking a new hobby. The workshop became a gathering place where people created useful items while building the kinds of relationships that made communities strong. The most meaningful project came when the town decided to create a permanent memorial to their transformation. Rather than a traditional monument, they chose to build a community garden where everyone could contribute plants, design elements, and labor. At the center, They placed a simple wooden bench that Dax had crafted from local oak with a brass plaque that read, "In memory of barriers broken and families chosen." The garden became a place where newcomers planted vegetables from their homelands alongside native species, where longtime residents shared gardening wisdom with people learning to grow food in unfamiliar soil, where Oliver and Lucas could often be found reading to smaller youngsters under the apple trees that the community had planted together. Local newspapers began referring to the Willowbrook model approach to community building that prioritized human dignity over bureaucratic procedure, that chose inclusion over exclusion, that demonstrated how small acts of courage could create lasting change. Delegations from other small towns began visiting, seeking to understand how a place that had once been notable only for its quiet, rural charm had become a destination for families seeking sanctuary. But for the residents of Willowbrook, the most important change was simpler and more personal. They had learned they were capable of extraordinary things when they acted from love rather than fear. They had discovered that protecting one family could inspire them to protect many families, that standing up for strangers could strengthen bonds with neighbors, that choosing compassion over convention could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. The royal representatives never returned to challenge Seraphine's renunciation or the town's protection of their chosen family. Perhaps they recognized that trying to reclaim someone who had found genuine belonging would be futile. Perhaps they understood that Willowbrook had become something that even 800 years of royal tradition couldn't overcome. A place where love was stronger than law, where community was more powerful than crown, and where ordinary people had proven themselves capable of extraordinary grace. As autumn settled over the town that had chosen to become extraordinary, the residents of Willowbrook continued their daily lives with a new understanding of what was possible when people decided to care for each other without condition or reservation. They had become, quite simply, a community that kept its doors open and its hearts ready for whoever might need sanctuary from whatever storm was raging outside. 5 years later, on a crisp October morning that painted the trees around Willowbrook in shades of gold and crimson, Dax Ironwood stood at the edge of the community garden, watching his daughter take her first tentative steps between the rows of vegetables that families from 17 different countries had planted together. Little Emma Rose, named for both the daughter he had lost and the woman who had given him a second chance at love, wobbled forward on unsteady legs, her dark curls catching the autumn sunlight as she reached for the butterflies dancing among the late-season flowers. The garden had grown far beyond anyone's initial vision. What had started as a simple memorial to transformation had become the heart of a community that now welcomed over 200 refugee and transitional families each year. The wooden bench Dax had crafted still sat at the center, but it was now surrounded by pathways lined with stones carved with words of welcome in dozens of languages, donated by families who had found sanctuary in Willowbrook and wanted to ensure others would feel equally embraced. "She's got your stubborn streak," Serafina said, settling beside him on the bench with the easy grace of a woman who had learned to carry herself like a mother and partner rather than a princess. The formal bearing that had once marked her royal training had softened into something warmer, more genuine, though she still possessed an elegance that turned heads whenever they traveled beyond their small town. "And your determination," Dax replied, wrapping his arm around his wife's shoulders, and marveling, as he did every day, at the family they had built from the wreckage of their separate losses. The wedding had been a town celebration 2 years earlier, with Mrs. Patterson providing a cake that fed half the county and Pastor Reynolds performing a ceremony that seamlessly blended American traditions with customs from the dozen cultures that now called Willowbrook home. Oliver and Lucas, now 11 and growing into the kind of confident, compassionate young men that made everyone who knew them believe in the future, were across the garden helping newer arrivals plant winter vegetables. Their formal childhood training in protocol and diplomacy had transformed into natural leadership skills, that they used to help younger refugee families navigate their new country's customs and institutions. Both boys had become fluent in Spanish from working with Elena Martinez's family and were learning Arabic from the Rashid family who had arrived the previous spring. "Mr. Dax," called Oliver, his voice carrying the excitement that still bubbled up whenever he mastered a new skill. "Mrs. Fatima says these seeds will grow even in the snow. Can we plant them by the workshop so Emma can watch them come up in the spring?" The workshop had evolved into something Dax had never imagined when he was living alone with his grief. What had once been his solitary refuge was now a bustling community center where refugees learned job skills, teenagers found mentorship, and anyone seeking purpose could discover the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with their hands. 3 mornings a week, Dax taught furniture making to immigrants seeking employment in the construction trades. 2 afternoons, Oliver and Lucas led a program where older youngsters taught woodworking basics to newly arrived families. Evenings often found the space filled with language classes, citizenship preparation sessions, or simply neighbors gathering to work on projects while sharing stories from their homelands. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Some longtime residents had initially resented the changes, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden influx of different languages, customs, and needs. There had been heated town meetings, cultural misunderstandings, and moments when the community's commitment to inclusivity had been tested by practical limitations and human prejudices, but each crisis had ultimately strengthened rather than divided them. When a group of residents complained about the cost of providing translators for town meetings, Elena Martinez organized a volunteer interpreter network that not only solved the immediate problem, but created deeper connections between longtime residents and newcomers. When housing shortages threatened to turn neighbors against each other, Dax led an initiative to build affordable transitional housing on donated land, creating a construction training program that employed both recent immigrants and local workers. Success of what journalists had dubbed the Willowbrook model had attracted attention from far beyond their small community. Delegations from other rural towns facing population decline visited regularly, seeking to understand how a place that had once seemed destined for slow extinction had become a thriving example of sustainable community development. Universities sent researchers to study their integration programs. The State Department featured Willowbrook in presentations about successful refugee resettlement strategies, but perhaps the most meaningful recognition had come from the families themselves. The town's population had grown from 800 to nearly 2,000, with a waiting list of families hoping to join the community. Former refugees who had moved on to larger cities for employment opportunities returned for holidays and special events, treating Willowbrook as the home base they carried in their hearts wherever they went. Serafina had become the unofficial mayor of this transformation, though she had never sought elected office. Her experience bridging different worlds' royal protocol and small-town American life, privilege and persecution, formality and warmth had made her a natural advocate for families navigating cultural transitions. She ran the new family center from a converted storefront on Main Street, coordinating everything from English classes to job placement to cultural orientation sessions that helped both newcomers and longtime residents understand each other better. The center's success had led to invitations from international humanitarian organizations, offers to head programs in major cities, and opportunities that would have launched her into a career of global significance. But Serafina had turned them all down, choosing instead to build something lasting in the place where she had first learned that love could be stronger than obligation. "I spent the first part of my life preparing to rule a kingdom," she had told a reporter from the Washington Post who had driven up to interview her about the community's success. "But it turns out I was meant to help build a home." The interview had run with a photograph of Serafina in the workshop, teaching a group of teenage girls from various countries how to sand wood while baby Emma napped in a carrier on her back. The caption read, "Former princess finds her kingdom in small-town America." But those who knew her understood that the real story was simpler and more profound. A woman who had discovered that true power lay not in commanding subjects but in serving community. Oliver and Lucas had grown into the story in their own way. They remembered their royal heritage as an interesting piece of family history, like having ancestors who fought in famous wars or built notable buildings. Occasionally, they received letters from distant relatives in Velthorn, formal communications that acknowledged their continued existence without making any demands on their loyalty or presence. The boys would read these letters with the polite attention they gave to homework assignments, then return to their American lives with the comfortable certainty that their real family was the one they had chosen and been chosen by. The royal drama that had once seemed so overwhelming now felt like something from a fairy tale relevant to their past but irrelevant to their future. Oliver had decided he wanted to become a teacher like Elena Martinez, inspired by her ability to help families navigate new cultures. Lucas was fascinated by Dr. Patterson's work and talked constantly about becoming a doctor who could provide care to people regardless of their ability to pay. Neither boy spoke of crowns or thrones or royal obligations. They spoke of colleges they hoped to attend, career paths they wanted to explore, and the families they might someday raise in the community that had taught them what belonging really meant. As the afternoon light began to deepen, more families gathered in the garden for the weekly community dinner that had become a Willowbrook tradition. Long tables appeared from the church storage room, carried by teenagers who had learned that helping neighbors was simply what people did. Dishes representing dozens of cultures covered the tables. Elena's tamales next to Mrs. Olson's Danish. Pastries, the Rashid family's kebabs beside Mrs. Patterson's famous apple pie. Dax watched Emma toddle between the gathering adults, completely at ease with the multilingual chatter and the gentle hands that steadied her steps or offered her bites of interesting foods. This was the only world she had ever known, a place where different languages mixed freely, where families looked like collections of people who had chosen each other, where the most natural thing in the world was to make room at the table for whoever needed a place to sit. As the sun set behind the mountains that surrounded their valley, Dax found himself thinking about the man he had been 5 years earlier, isolated by grief, protected by routine, convinced that love was too dangerous to risk again. That man had been certain that opening his door would only lead to more loss, more pain, more reasons to regret caring about anyone. But the man he had become understood that love was not something to be hoarded or protected. Love was something that grew stronger when it was shared, that multiplied when it was given away, that created connections that could withstand any storm, even ones that arrived with legal documents and centuries of tradition behind them. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't stopped here that night? Serafina asked quietly, following his gaze to where Oliver and Lucas were helping elderly. Mr. Chun learned to use his smartphone so he could video call his grandchildren in Taiwan. Dax considered the question seriously. I think we would have found each other eventually, he said finally. Maybe not here, maybe not then, but somehow, some things are meant to be. She smiled and leaned into his shoulder. Some things are chosen to be, she corrected gently. That's what makes them stronger. As the community dinner continued around them, filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation in languages from around the world, as Emma took careful steps between people who had become family through choice rather than blood, as Oliver and Lucas helped coordinate the evening's activities with the confidence of young people who had learned early that their voices mattered, Dax understood that they had created something that would outlast all of them. They had proven that ordinary people could choose extraordinary love. They had demonstrated that communities could be built on compassion rather than convenience. They had shown that families formed by choice could be stronger than those bound by law or tradition. But most importantly, they had created a place where anyone running from any storm could find shelter, where anyone seeking belonging could find family, and where anyone brave enough to start over could discover that second chances were not just possible, they were the foundation on which all meaningful change was built. As night settled over Willowbrook, the lights in windows began to glow like stars, each one representing a family that had found their way home to a place that measured worth, not by bloodlines or bank accounts, but by the simple willingness to open doors when someone knocked, to make room at tables when someone was hungry, and to choose love especially when it required courage to do so. 15 years after a pregnant widow first knocked on Dax Ironwood's workshop door, Emma Rose Ironwood stood at the podium of the United Nations headquarters in New York City, adjusting the microphone with the same careful precision her father had once used to measure wood joints. At 20, she possessed her mother's regal bearing and her father's quiet strength. But there was something uniquely her own in the way she carried herself, a confidence born not from royal bloodlines or inherited privilege, but from growing up in a community that had taught her that anyone could change the world if they were willing to open their heart to it. "My name is Emma Rose Ironwood," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the assembly hall where delegates from 193 countries had gathered to discuss global refugee policies. "I'm here to tell you about a small town in Vermont that accidentally became a blueprint for how communities can heal themselves by healing others." In the audience, Serafina Ironwood watched her daughter with the kind of pride that had nothing to do with titles or achievements and everything to do with watching someone you love become exactly who they were meant to be. Beside her, Dax squeezed her hand gently, both of them marveling at how the shy toddler who had once chased butterflies in their community garden had grown into a young woman, confident enough to address world leaders about the power of ordinary compassion. The invitation to speak at the UN had come through Oliver, who at 26 had become a professor of international relations at Georgetown University and was consulting with various humanitarian organizations about community-based refugee integration models. His doctoral dissertation on the Willowbrook model, sustainable community development through inclusive growth, had become required reading in graduate programs across the country, but he still returned home every few months to help coordinate the town's expanded programs. Lucas, now a practicing physician specializing in refugee health services, ran mobile medical clinics that served rural communities throughout New England. His work had taken him far from Willowbrook, but he carried its lessons with him everywhere he went. The understanding that healing happened not just through medicine, but through community. Not just through treating illness, but through preventing the isolation and despair that made people sick in the first place. Emma had grown up watching all of this unfold. She had learned to read before she learned to walk, sitting in the new family center while her mother conducted orientation sessions in 3 different languages. She had learned mathematics by helping her father calculate lumber costs for the transitional housing projects that now dotted the hills around Willowbrook. She had learned history from the stories told by families who had fled wars, persecution, and natural disasters to find safety in her hometown. But most importantly, she had learned that the difference between a community that thrived and one that merely survived was whether its people chose to see newcomers as problems to be solved or as gifts to be unwrapped. 15 years ago, Emma continued, her presentation accompanied by photographs that showed Willowbrook's transformation from a struggling rural town to a thriving multicultural community. "My parents made a choice that seemed small at the time, but created ripples that are still spreading around the world. They chose to see a family in crisis not as someone else's responsibility, but as their own opportunity to grow." The slides behind her showed the community garden where she had taken her first steps, now expanded to cover 12 acres and producing food for both local consumption and international relief efforts. They showed the workshop where her father still taught woodworking skills to refugees and immigrants, now part of a network of community centers that had been replicated in 47 towns across 6 states. They showed the new family center that her mother directed, now serving as a model for integration programs, being implemented in communities from Maine to California. But the most powerful images were the faces, hundreds of them, representing the families who had found their way to Willowbrook over the past decade and a half. Teachers and doctors and engineers who had rebuilt their careers. Farmers who had adapted their traditional techniques to Vermont soil. Artists who had enriched the local culture with traditions from their homelands. Entrepreneurs who had started businesses that employed both longtime residents and recent arrivals. The economic data is compelling, Emma said, clicking to a slide that showed Willowbrook's population growth, employment rates, and median income compared to similar rural communities. Towns that embrace refugee resettlement see increased tax revenue, decreased unemployment, and revitalized main streets. But the human data is even more powerful. She clicked again, and the screen filled with a photograph from the previous year's community celebration. Hundreds of people gathered in the town square, representing dozens of countries and cultures, all laughing at something Oliver had said during his speech welcoming the newest arrivals. In the center of the crowd, Dax and Serafina sat with Emma between them, surrounded by the extended family that had grown from their original choice to open their door during a storm. This is what happens, Emma said, when communities choose growth over fear, when they measure success not by who they keep out, but by how well they help people find their place inside. The presentation that had started as a simple case study had evolved into something larger, a challenge to the assembled delegates to reconsider their assumptions about refugee resettlement, community development, and the relationship between national security and human compassion. Emma had spent the past 2 years traveling to communities around the world, documenting successful integration programs and helping other towns implement variations of the Willowbrook model. She had seen Somali refugees revitalize farming communities in Iowa, Syrian families bring new life to dying industrial towns in Ohio, and Vietnamese immigrants create thriving fishing cooperatives in coastal Maine. But she had also seen communities where fear and prejudice had created cycles of conflict and stagnation, where resources were wasted on building walls instead of bridges, where potential allies were treated as inevitable enemies. The choice, she told the delegates, is always the same. We can spend our energy trying to keep people out, or we can invest it in helping them find ways to contribute. We can see diversity as a threat to our stability, or we can recognize it as the source of our strength. After her presentation, during the reception where diplomats in expensive suits mingled with humanitarian workers and academic researchers, Emma found herself surrounded by questions that went far beyond policy. Implementation. Delegates wanted to know about her own experience growing up in such a community, about whether the integration had really been as smooth as she made it sound, about what it felt like to be raised in a place where difference was celebrated rather than merely tolerated. It wasn't always easy, she answered honestly. There were cultural misunderstandings, language barriers, and moments when people's patience ran thin. But we learned that conflict isn't the opposite of community avoidance. When people disagree but keep talking to each other, they find solutions. When they stop talking, they find enemies. An ambassador from a European country that had been struggling with refugee integration asked about the role of leadership in Willowbrook's success. How do you maintain community support when resources are stretched and longtime residents feel overwhelmed? Emma smiled, thinking of Mrs. Patterson, now in her 70s but still running the Safe Harbor Bakery with the help of a staff that included refugees from 6 different countries. You make sure that everyone has a way to contribute, not just receive. You create opportunities for longtime residents and newcomers to work together on projects that benefit everyone. And you never forget that building community is a daily choice, not a one-time decision. Later that evening, back in their hotel room overlooking the East River, Dax and Serafina reflected on how far they had all traveled from that stormy night. when desperation had brought 3 strangers to a furniture maker's door. "Do you think she knows?" Serafina asked, watching Emma review her notes for the next day's follow-up meetings with various humanitarian organizations. "Knows what?" Dax replied, though he suspected he understood the question. "How extraordinary." "She is. How extraordinary all of this has become." Dax considered the question while watching their daughter, the one who had grown up thinking it was perfectly normal for dinner conversation to include discussions of international law, sustainable agriculture, and comparative cultural traditions. Emma had never known a world where helping strangers wasn't the most natural thing people could do, where opening doors to those in need required courage rather than simple human decency. "I think," he said finally, "she knows that what we built together is special. But I also think she sees it as the beginning of something even bigger, not the end result of something unusual." And he was right. Emma's presentation at the UN was just one part of a larger project she had been developing, a network of communities committed to implementing refugee-friendly policies, sharing resources and strategies, and proving that small towns could be laboratories for social innovation rather than barriers to necessary change. The network had started with the towns that had already implemented variations of the Willowbrook model, but it was growing to include communities that were just beginning to explore what inclusive development might look like. Urban neighborhoods were adapting the principles for immigrant integration programs. Suburban communities were using similar approaches to address homelessness and poverty. Even some major cities were incorporating elements of the model into their social services infrastructure. Emma had also been accepted to law school, planning to specialize in international human rights law with a focus on community-based solutions to global displacement crises. But unlike previous generations who had sought to change the world through top-down institutional reform, she believed that lasting change happened when local communities decided to embody the values they wanted to see reflected in larger society. The most powerful legislation, she had written in her application essay, is the daily decision to treat strangers as neighbors, to see difference as opportunity, and to measure prosperity not by what we accumulate for ourselves, but by what we create together. 2 days later, as they prepared to return to Willowbrook, Emma received a call that would reshape her immediate plans. A coalition of rural communities in 3 different states had requested her help in developing integrated responses to climate-induced displacement. The growing number of families forced to relocate due to extreme weather events, failed harvests, and changing environmental conditions. "It's exactly what Willowbrook has been preparing for," she told her parents excitedly. "All the systems we've developed for helping people start over, all the experience we've gained in economic integration and cultural bridge building. This is how it scales up to address the challenges that are coming." Because Emma had grown up understanding something that many policymakers still struggled to grasp. The climate crisis and the refugee crisis weren't separate problems, requiring different solutions. They were interconnected challenges that demanded communities capable of adaptation, inclusion, and mutual support. Towns that had learned to help displaced families rebuild their lives would be the same towns that could help each other survive and thrive as the world continued to change in unpredictable ways. As their plane descended toward Vermont, flying over the patchwork of small communities nestled in valleys between rolling green mountains, Dax looked down at the landscape that had shaped his daughter's understanding of what was possible when people chose hope over fear. Somewhere below was Willowbrook, where Mrs. Patterson was probably preparing tomorrow's bread while chatting with her multilingual staff, where Oliver and Lucas were likely visiting during their academic break and helping with the autumn harvest in the community gardens, where hundreds of families were living the daily proof that love really could be stronger than law, that community really could be more powerful than conflict. "She's going to change the world," Serafina said softly, watching Emma review the proposal she would present to the Climate Resilience Coalition. She already has, Dax replied. We all have. One family, one community, one choice at a time. And as they flew home to the place where it had all begun, all three of them understood that the story that had started with a desperate knock on a door during the storm had become something larger than any of them had imagined. A demonstration that ordinary people, making extraordinary choices about love and belonging, could create the kind of change that transformed not just individual lives, but entire societies. The ripples were still spreading, carried forward by a young woman who had learned from birth that the most powerful force in the world was not authority or tradition or law, but the simple decision to open your door when someone needed shelter, your table when someone needed food, and your heart when someone needed family. In a world that often seemed defined by division and fear, Emma Rose Ironwood represented something different. The possibility that the next generation might inherit not just the problems created by those who came before, but also the solutions discovered by communities brave enough to choose love over law, inclusion over isolation, and hope over fear. On a December evening 20 years after that first storm brought unexpected guests to his door, Dax Ironwood stood in his workshop putting the finishing touches on a rocking chair. His hands, now lined with the wisdom of 7 decades but still steady and sure, moved the sandpaper in long practiced strokes across the smooth cherry wood. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, not the violent, desperate storm that had changed his life, but the gentle, peaceful kind that blanketed Willowbrook like a blessing. The workshop had changed over the years. Where once there had been space for only one man's solitary projects, now there were multiple workstations where fathers taught their sons, mothers learned alongside their daughters, and neighbors from 6 continents shared techniques passed down through generations. But in the corner where Dax still kept his personal workbench, some things remained constant: the careful attention to detail, the patience required for true craftsmanship, and the quiet satisfaction of creating something beautiful that would last. The rocking chair was a gift for Emma, who had just called with news that would make Serafina cry happy tears and fill the house with the kind of joyful chaos they had been missing since she moved to Washington for her work with the International Refugee Assistance Program. Their first grandchild was on the way, and Emma had specifically requested one of her father's rocking chairs, the kind where lullabies could be sung and stories could be told, and new generations could learn what it meant to be loved unconditionally. As if summoned by his thoughts, Serafina appeared in the workshop doorway, carrying 2 steaming mugs of the spiced cider that had become their winter evening tradition. At 55, she moved with the same grace that had once marked her royal training, but now it was softened by 20 years of choosing love over duty, family over obligation, and community over crown. The woman who had once been destined to rule a kingdom had instead helped build something more lasting, a place where anyone could belong. It's beautiful, she said, settling beside him on the wooden stool Oliver had made in this same workshop 15 years earlier. She's going to love it. She'll probably analyze its structural engineering and suggest improvements, Dax replied, with the kind of fond exasperation that came from watching your daughter grow into someone who inherited your craftsmanship but applied it to reshaping international policy. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wind whisper around the building and watching the snow accumulate on the windowsills. Through the glass, they could see lights beginning to glow in houses throughout Willowbrook, homes that sheltered families from dozens of countries, businesses run by immigrants and refugees who had become integral parts of the community's fabric. Schools where children learned that speaking multiple languages and honoring diverse traditions wasn't just normal but necessary. Do you ever think about that night? Serafina asked quietly. About what would have happened if you hadn't opened the door? Dax considered the question, as he had countless times over the years. I think about who I would have remained, he said finally. A man so afraid of losing anything else that he'd already lost everything that mattered. And now, he looked around. The workshop that had become a symbol of transformation. Then at the woman who had taught him that love multiplied when it was shared rather than hoarded. Now I understand that the only way to keep love is to give it away. Through the workshop windows, they could see Oliver's car pulling into the driveway, followed by Lucas's SUV. Both men were home for the holidays, bringing partners and stories from their work around the world, but always returning to the place that had taught them what family really meant. Oliver's husband, David, was a social worker who specialized in refugee family services, while Lucas's wife, Maria, ran free health clinics in underserved communities throughout Central America. Soon, the house would be filled with the sounds Dax had once thought were lost forever. Multiple conversations happening in different languages, laughter echoing from the kitchen, the comfortable chaos of people who belong to each other by choice rather than accident. There would be stories shared about Emma's latest project to establish refugee-friendly policies in climate-vulnerable communities, updates on the Willowbrook model being implemented in communities across 3 continents, and plans for the next generation of innovations in community-based humanitarian response. But beneath all the professional accomplishments and global recognition, the real success was simpler and more profound. They had created a family from fragments, a community from strangers, and hope from heartbreak. You know what I'm most grateful for? Serafina said as they heard car doors slamming and voices calling greetings through the snow. What's that? That storm that brought us to your door didn't just save us, it saved you too. Dax smiled, thinking of the man he had been isolated by grief, protected by walls, convinced that love was too dangerous to risk. That man had needed saving as much as the pregnant woman and frightened boys who had appeared on his doorstep seeking shelter. Maybe, he said, that's what storms are really for. Not to destroy things, but to wash away everything that's keeping us from becoming who we're meant to be. As Oliver and Lucas burst through the workshop door with armloads of gifts and stories from their travels, as the space filled with warmth and laughter, and the kind of belonging that could only be earned through years of choosing each other every single day. Dax understood that the story that had begun with desperate knocking on a door during a storm had become something eternal. It lived on in the communities around the world that had learned to measure strength by inclusion rather than exclusion. It continued in the policies Emma was helping craft to ensure that future storms, whether literal or metaphorical, wouldn't leave families without sanctuary. It endured in the young people who had grown up understanding that love was not a finite resource to be rationed, but an infinite one to be shared. And it would live on in the grandchild who would soon sleep in the rocking chair Dax was crafting, who would grow up in a world where opening doors to strangers was not an act of courage but simply the natural way people treated each other. Because some storms, Dax had learned, don't come to destroy. They come to deliver exactly what we need, exactly when we're finally ready to receive it. And sometimes what they deliver isn't just shelter from the wind and rain, but the family we never knew we were waiting for. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.